Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to redo a couple of these leaf-tailed gecko enclosures, and it's all for the better. Guys, if you get a chance, make sure to check out the Australian Herpetoculture Podcast over on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. Jason Rogers and myself are banging out episodes on a weekly basis. Whether it's just us hanging out and talking reptiles or if we're getting other guests on, it's kind of yet to be foreseen, but we're getting a solid crew of guests that are lining up to come on this show, and there's going to be some awesome Australian reptile content coming out for your listening pleasure. So make sure you go and follow us all over on these channels and bits and pieces, and give us a bit of feedback too. We'd really appreciate it. So as you can see, guys, this cornutus leafy enclosure is looking fantastic, as is the geckos. And yeah, I want to show you how I redid these. I'd already made the backgrounds in these previously, but I wanted to show you how I kind of put everything together and made it look nice and new. So these geckos are some of the largest geckos in Australia. If by size, physical size and length, I think they are the largest. The Saltuarius is another really large leaf-tailed gecko, and they have a larger tail, but these guys, I think body length is actually a longer species. This one here is still only young. It's only about a year old, so it's still got a little bit of growing to do. But they're an awesome little gecko, very nocturnal, very cryptic. It's one of those animals that you don't really see in the enclosure until night time and when they come out on the hunt. They're a fantastic species. I really enjoy keeping these guys. And as you can see, they look a hell of a lot better inside a natural looking environment just like this. So this enclosure makeup is kind of a bit like cheating, because it was an enclosure that I've already previously carved out the foam and everything on. For this particular enclosure, the original one was made out of expanding foam, then painted over with different layers of waterproofing and acrylic paints. As you can see, I'm whacking a hell of a lot of this good old tile pointing all over this enclosure, making sure to get in every nook and cranny and right around the edges at the top too, so no cheeky crickets actually chew through the foam. As per all of the builds, I will be doing 3 layers of the tile pointing on this just to really stiffen it up. I do like the texture that it gives, and it's also way easier to clean than just the acrylic paints and the waterproofing. As you can see, this next layer is a bit of a different shade of colour, and I'm using an oxide throughout the tile pointing. I'm using the bluestone oxide, one just that I got from Bunnings. It's only, $14-15 a bag, but it just helps to kind of colour up the tile pointing really easily for different themed terrariums. The next step that I'm doing is I'm just using some different shades of brown paint to kind of just blotch in some certain areas that might look like they've actually broken away from some sandstone along the way. Generally these are kind of like little caves and divots underneath bits and pieces, as this is where probably the rocks cracked away, therefore it might be showing some of the newer kind of fresher looking sandstone underneath. From there I'm using some darker black paint just mixed down with a bit of water just to kind of shade in some of the areas that I mucked up with the brown paint essentially, but this is also just going to give a bit of a nice weathered sandstone look. We'll see a little bit of a close-up just coming up, and that'll give you a bit of an idea how it's starting to look. Here you can start to see where I've meant that, those little chips of sandstone have come out, and you've got the kind of harsher, darker stuff that's weathered on top. Gives you a really kind of a different depth of perception to the build. We're not quite done yet though. There's a few other little tricks up my sleeve that I want to incorporate on this one. And a lot of that's some white highlights just to kind of give, like a bit of an edge to some of the enclosure. These little highlights that I'm putting in here too, they're only fine little details, and a lot of them will kind of blend in a lot after time. As per my last leaf tail enclosure build, I'm going to try to paint on some nice little lichen patches as well. I'm quite fond of that, and it just gives it a different little look. And as per all of my current exoterica enclosures, I'm using a little drain pipe as well, just with some holes drilled into the bottom. This is going to be way easier to use, just to siphon a little bit of water out should I need to. Still not confident enough to start drilling my exoteras. If I muck one up, it's a lot of money to be replacing an enclosure like this. As per usual, I'm starting with a drainage layer. These hydro balls, or these clay expanded balls, these are just supplied by fish organics and reptile supplies. I'm getting a nice deep layer of them on this build too, because I know there's going to be a fair bit of dirt sitting on top, so I've got to make sure that all can drain away, and it's all relevant. If you're not going to be putting a lot of water into a tank, you don't need a super deep drainage layer. The deeper your soil, the more drainage layer that I'd actually incorporate, just to make sure that soil can all have the opportunity to drain away should it get a little bit flooded. This time around I'm using a little bit of aluminium fly screen just to see if it's any different to the kind of fiberglass fly screen you can buy. To be honest, I really like the fiberglass stuff. It's just way easier to kind of get right into the corners. So here you can see the soils that we're using. There's an all-purpose organic compost, just some basic garden soil, some eucalyptus mulch, and I will be topping it off with a whole bunch of leaf litter. Here you can see some of the plants that we're going to incorporate in this build. I didn't actually end up using the Rapis palm in here. I might end up saving that for a Boyd's Forest Dragon enclosure build that I got coming up. But we've got a nice bird's nest fern here, also a tree fern, and another one, I believe it's Hardenbergia. If I haven't pronounced that correctly, I'm sorry. I'm not very good with Latin names, but it's an awesome looking vining plant. This is actually an Australian native, and it does have some nice little pretty flowers along the way, so it's actually really settled well into this enclosure. And this is the Rapis palm that I haven't used, or a lady palm, but yeah, as I said, I've got a really big Boyd's enclosure that I will be building soon, so I think I'm going to incorporate it in that. You can see here that I'm knocking a bit of dirt out of these. I'm not going too mental on the tree fern just because it will be pretty deep in the soil, and it'll also disturb a lot of the root structure, which these guys don't like. I ended up repotting the Rapis palm a little bit later too, as I decided that I wasn't going to use it. The little bird's nest fern though, I was pretty confident in getting a lot of the dirt out of there, because I'm actually going to try to use it as a proper epiphyte and kind of wedge it up into a tree branch. You can see here that I'm kind of wrapping a bit of sphagnum moss around there with a little bit of gardening wire as well, just to hold it into place. I am going to see how this goes. I've never done this before, but I figure the bird's nest fern's probably the best one to do it to, as they're always clinging onto rock faces and trees and everything in the bush. So I wanted to give it a real hot crack. once all the plants are in place, I just topped it off with a bit of that garden topsoil, just to kind of fill up a bit of the dirt area, as I didn't want it all to be organic compost. This is a good little filling item. From there I ended up capping everything off with a little bit of the eucalyptus mulch. Nothing's a bit more natural than a whole bunch of leaf litter in here too. This is going to be a whole bunch of hiding areas for your cleanup crew like springtails and wood lice, and it's also going to help keep the humidity in the soil. This may look a little funny here, but I'm actually squeezing dabs of super glue onto the rock face and then using some wet sphagnum moss to kind of pin the vine into place. And that wet sphagnum moss actually almost sets the super glue even quicker, so then it holds it into place, especially for something that's going to give it a bit of resistance like this vine. And it's just a way for me to try to attach the vine to the actual background as well, so then hopefully it can kind of grow onto the background and really create just a sheet of these awesome looking leaves. Trying it here too with a little bit of lichen that I managed to save off a rock, and I'm not sure if this is going to actually end up working long term, but it would be really cool to end up being able to grow live lichen all over this rock face as well as these vines. It would just be really awesome to kind of give it a whole bunch of different textural contrast. I also managed to find a whole bunch of moss growing on a bit of a shaded path around the side of the house as well, so I decided to wedge this in around the sphagnum moss and see if I can aim the Mist King nozzle straight at it, and hopefully I can keep it alive, because I reckon it would be kind of really cool to tie it in with this bird's nest fern. I gave everything a really good water just to kind of make sure that all the roots were nice and wet in the new soil, and let it all settle in. Something that I probably don't show often enough is the little black sponge that I actually put in my drainage pipes. This stops all the crickets and other bits and pieces and bark and all sorts going down into there. So after all of this, I'm going to whack some bugs into there, so it's time to start raiding the wood lice colony and also get some springtails into there. So after adding these springtails in, I am done and keen to get these geckos back into this enclosure. So thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I'm going to leave you with a whole bunch of cinematic shots of these beautiful animals in their beautiful new habitat. I'd really appreciate it if you guys checked out the Australian Herpetoculture Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Apple Podcasts, and also over on Spotify. Make sure that you like the video, subscribe if you'd like to as well, I'd really appreciate that, and you can also check out Patreon and the Teespring store as well while you're here. Links will all be in the description below. Cheers guys, and I shall see you in the next video.